All right, I have 10 o'clock Central Time, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And so want to welcome everybody today. The Trying to pull up my spreadsheet real quick here. If Just in case you need to know where you are right now, you're in the session virtual recruitment events, utilizing technology, motivating staff, encouraging students, building connections, and making virtual events work for you. I have two presenters for you today. Elena Johnson, who's the Interim Associate Dean of Admissions and Director of the Washington Scholars Program and K-12 Partnerships with George Mason University, and Chris Collins, Associate Director for Enrollment Management, Campus Visits at North Carolina State University. If you have some questions for this, for the team, our duo here, feel free to utilize the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that chat throughout the session. And without any further ado, I will turn it over to Elena and Chris. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. As he mentioned, let's make sure this is very interactive. This is a very hot topic at a lot of conferences recently with COVID-19 and going virtual. So we'll give a little bit about our backgrounds and what we do specifically at our institution, and then we'll talk a little bit about our experience with going virtual in the past year or so. And then again, at any point you have questions or comments or things your institution's doing well or struggling with, we'd love to get those. So again, my name is Chris Collins. I work at North Carolina State University. I handle our Joiner Visitor Center. So our Visitor Center, which does our information sessions for prospective students on campus, the campus tours, and at the Visitor Center, we have admissions counselors that meet with prospective students and admitted students when they come to campus. We see about 50,000 people coming through our doors each year. So obviously going virtual almost a year ago was a big challenge that we saw. So I'll let Elena introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Elena Johnson. I'm at George Mason University up in Northern Virginia in Fairfax. And my role in the Office of Admissions, my team plans all the virtual events and summer conferences. So, and some other things with college access. But obviously our jobs, like everyone else, were flipped upside down last March. And it took us about a month to get on our feet and figure out how we're going to do our virtual events for our admitted students at the time, then switch to prospective students and transfer. And we also moved our summer conferences online and did a virtual experience for students from across the country. So I think we've learned a lot. It's been kind of fun. We obviously would rather be in person, but we've tried to change at least one thing for every event to kind of keep it exciting for ourselves and for the students, and try and keep up with the technology that they're seeing from their own high schools and different events that they're attending as well.
Great. And so I'll cover a couple little background information and some of the challenges and successes we've seen here at NC State. And so first thing, about a year ago when we pivoted to virtually, I'll be honest, we didn't do a lot virtually with our daily visit program. Obviously, a lot of statistics and data and student stories, surveys, everything tells you being on campus is a big driving factor to enrollment, reducing summer melts, all of those pain points that you would see in terms of students not entering. A lot of it factored down to their experience coming to your campus. And so that is what we really focused on, is that on-campus experience. And so virtual was very new to us, and it happened very quickly. We pivoted from a Thursday, I think it was March 18th, And the next Wednesday is when we started rolling out our virtual programming. So some of the things we saw and adapted very quickly was the population that we were seeing. On campus, we were about 75 to 80% in-state, coming from around North Carolina. Within the first few months, we saw that virtually it was about 50-50 in terms of in-state and out-of-state. And so we saw that we were reaching a new market, and we realized then that we needed to quickly diversify our offerings. Through our office, we primarily just did those daily information sessions. So a little bit about the institution, the application process, scholarships, etc. And we realized that virtual events were really easy to sign up for. And so the out-of-state students and those students that may not have come to your campus were now viewing you virtually. And so we really had to diversify our offerings, and that meant developing partnerships across the campus. So internal stakeholders, we really had to gather and do. So what we started doing was figuring out what interest would students have: honor scholars, financial aid, the colleges. We have pre-professional advising, so like pre-med, really trying to diversify our offerings because we knew students were really going to start engaging more. One example, we pulled a student once we went into the fall. One student viewed 8 different virtual events that we offered from March until the fall. And that was much different than just offering a general information session. And so really having to develop those internal stakeholder relationships to then be able to diversify your virtual offerings is where we really started seeing the success and those students really starting to engage with the various sessions. And so that's what we initially saw. Once we started really getting into the fall was the need to diversify our offerings. And so, Elena, I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about your experiences there early on.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think when we started, we just tried to replicate what we would have done on campus in a virtual world, and found that that was really difficult and it doesn't work most of the time. I think we made do last spring. And then when we went into the fall, we really shifted our strategy to try and use like different technologies. We tried live streaming different events. We tried to record in our the television studio on campus just to up our production quality. So we were just trying different ways to engage students and make them feel included. And the charge is to make them feel like they're on campus, right? Which can be really difficult. So who are those people that we can put in front of them? And a lot of times I think like our office tended to think like, oh, we'll put the provost or different administrators, but that's just not the case. I think the students sell the campus. So like Chris was saying, those relationships on campus, but especially with the students and like who are those shining stars on campus that we can put in front of students, whether it's a panel or an opening to an event. But I'm fairly convinced that that's who does most of the work at these virtual events. It's just like in person, we would have had the ambassadors giving tours and speaking in front of students. So, and the students we found on campus are really excited to engage with the prospective students. So that's really kind of where we've taken our virtual offerings. I would say with the exception of our transfer, we have a very large transfer population here at Mason. And we noticed at the open houses, people were signing up, but they weren't showing up. So what could we do differently? And so we started doing one-on-ones, block a whole day, get as much admission staff as possible to do one-on-one appointments. And we saw an 85% show rate compared to a 51% show rate. So that is great. And I think that that's something that hopefully when we are all back in person, we'll continue doing. I think we learned a lot about just being able to offer a decision really quickly and counsel those students. The questions are just so different. So we definitely have learned a lot about what students are looking for. The registration process as well. Like we were used to sending postcards like a month and a half out and then starting the email campaign, and virtual is just different. Like we got more than half of our registrations in the fall came the day of the event. So the importance of like that day of email push or text push became very evident when we would just watch the dashboards and the enrollments and the registrations go up and up and up. So we're really trying to use that data as we go into the spring and talking to admitted students, because the event, we can do all the work we want, but if we don't have the students there, then what's the point? So that marketing has been really interesting to watch too as we shifted to virtual.
Yeah, and you brought up two great points that we dealt with, and that was technology and then what I call the student experience. As someone who supervises about 130 student ambassadors who give the daily tours, when you went virtual, it really took us about a month or so to then start being able to assess what we were doing. We just really tried to push out the product first, get it to where we thought it was what it needed to be, and then we were able to start assessing. And what I saw pretty immediately was that lack of current student connection that prospective students were missing in terms of when they were coming to campus. When I looked back at our in-person tour surveys, the positive remarks came around, conversing with current students and seeing what that daily student life was like. When you went virtual, we did an information session, we did some Q&A, but it was really staff oriented. And so we quickly realized that we needed to, everything we did from there on needed to include current students. And that meant after our information sessions, the Q&A was with students. It was Mondays and Wednesdays, we did student chats during lunch where prospective students could just drop in to our virtual platform and just ask questions to current students. Everything we needed to do had to involve current students because they needed that connection. And so that was something that was important. And I know that's what you explained at Mason. That was, that the current students wanted to interact with prospective students. That's why they signed up to do that. And so that was something that we found very integral moving forward. And so the second piece was that technology. We're a Slate school. So if you have questions about Slate or anything of those with events or visits, please let me know. But we quickly realized that our event-wise needed to be outside of the Slate platform. So we went with Zoom webinar for our information sessions and some of our events. And then, as I mentioned at the Visitor Center, we had counselors that would meet with prospective students. Those we did with Slate. We did with those with Slate Scheduler and those appointments. And so really figuring out the technology and quickly almost writing protocols for that. Simple things as understanding you need to have a backup because yes, it's 2021, but technology is not reliable and people were dropping out. So during a presentation, internet was cutting out. You needed to have somebody ready to jump in. Also, things that popped up for a speaker day of, we needed to make sure that there was a backup so that they could jump in because again, we were seeing very unique visitors signing up for our events. We couldn't just cancel or move it or anything like that. We had to make sure that we had some of that backup. And so we really wanted to make sure that the protocols were in place for all of our events. And then, I saw one of my colleagues here who actually does our open house and some of our big events, was working together across the university to really unify our virtual space across the university. We worked together to centralize the visit program. It was very decentralized. The 10 colleges did a lot of different things. And so we wanted to centralize that visit experience. So everybody, for the most part, was going into Slate, so that the communications, that those emails that Elena was talking about was unified for anything they signed up at NC State. The websites looked the same. The portals looked the same. The registration was the same. We wanted to make sure that it was the same experience across the board because, again, these were very unique individuals that were viewing our sessions that we weren't getting to campus, and we also weren't recruiting. We had folks signing up for our College of Education sessions who were from Iowa and Minnesota, which we don't recruit in. And so that was really opening up doors. So we really had to make sure that our technology, the protocols, the diversification of those events were in place so that it was a great experience.
I would agree. We worked a lot on technology, like trying to figure out the technology and then really trying to play to people's strengths in the office to see who had experience with web design and graphics and video that we didn't really have to tap into pre-COVID. And we discovered there were 2 or 3 people in the office who knew how to use WordPress and knew how to do video. So we have really just kind of moved most of their responsibilities to just focus on virtual events. We got a WordPress license through the university, and we've just been building all of our events using that site. We're a Target X school, so a little different, but really, how can we use the portal blocks, like Chris was saying, to engage people? We did we did one really unique event in the fall that we're replicating next week for the spring. And we did a live talk show. So, oh, sorry, the lights just went out in my office. Hold on one second. So we worked with an alumni who has a business where he live streams sporting events in the DC area. And he came to campus and we built a talk show. So we identified a couple people on our staff who were, we called them the talent. So it was like the Savannah and Hoda of the Today Show. And then we brought in, professors and students and, the leader of our pep band to do quick interviews. And we recorded it one day and it was live to tape. So then we featured it, we premiered it, we called it about a week later. And then after it was a 30-minute talk show. And afterwards we had live Zoom rooms with admissions counselors so people could get their questions answered. So we, you had to watch a little bit and it was not as interactive, but then we were able to do the interaction part. So we're going to try again next week because we did get a lot of good feedback from that and we're calling it our Patriot Pep Rally, because what we found is like online virtually, we can feature academics pretty easily. Like everybody on campus is really eager to get in front of the camera to share their programs with prospective students. We can feature university life offices, but it's really hard to capture that spirit of campus. So without like the big football team or like the national presence, we don't really have as much of that. So being able to feature what it's like to be on campus, what it's like, are students wearing their colors, what's it like to go to athletic events. So on Sunday, we're going to tape with our athletic director, leader of the pep band again, and some student athletes and people who are really involved, some ambassadors on campus to try and do a pep rally. So like the Patriot will come, the mascot will come. So just trying different ways, trying to find out what those gaps are, what are we missing, and plug them in. And that has required us to work really quickly because we identified that gap like 3 weeks ago, but we don't have 3 months to plan. None of us have the luxury of time at this point. So, who do we have contracts with on campus? What can we leverage already? And I think what I've learned the most, you just got to have a project manager. You got to have somebody on your staff who can just take the event and run with it and delegate the task and get the job done really quickly, especially in yield. I think it's because we just don't know what the students need. Like, we're all so new to this. So being able to just read those surveys, talk to students, figure it out, and move so quickly. And a lot of us from public institutions, it's really hard to move quickly. I know my only experience is in a public institution, but it's hard to get things through purchasing. Like, I can't just go sign a $30,000 contract in 3 weeks. So what are those, like those small chunks of money that we can pay? What money do we have? Identifying the budget, working with the right people on campus, and really showing the impact of our recruitment and events, I would say. So, getting that support from the top and just running with it really quickly, which can always be challenging.
Yeah, and I would say, I'll talk a little bit about the struggles that we had during. The first one was time. We had a pretty set schedule for on-campus visits, 10 a.m., 1 p.m. That was the set schedule. We had, people coming, it was an hour long. We had a really great schedule that we knew worked for us. It worked with, being in the triangle. So with UNC Chapel Hill, with Duke, we knew working together, their sessions are at this time, their sessions are at this time. So we had a pretty set schedule for in-person. Once we went virtual, the time, we had no concept of time. What time worked well for folks? What time worked well for students as well as their support system. So parents, guardians, whoever was helping them along the way with the college search process. So it was a lot of trial by error, figuring out, afternoon, morning, when we started seeing a lot more, as I mentioned, out of state families viewing, we knew that we had to push some of those out of the morning slots because you don't want to have a 10 a.m. and someone from California, it'd be 7 a.m. And so we really wanted to make sure that the time was fitting. And so again, we had to really rely on stakeholders. So through our Office of Undergraduate Admissions, we have a counselor panel of individuals who help advise us, so an advisory board of high school counselors that we were able to say, what time is going to work with you? When, what's your schedule? Are you synchronous, asynchronous? What does lunch look like? What time do you think your students and their families will have available to jump into a Zoom with us? And then we put it out on social media. Social media really became our outreach for figuring out what worked and what didn't work. We were putting out polls of what days of the week, morning, afternoon, what's going to work for you, and really then going with that and seeing the numbers. At the beginning, everybody in the country, for the most part, were remote. And so really anytime you were really able to capture, because a lot of folks were home. After that, a lot more folks are transitioning back to the office and students are going back into the school setting. And so that was is adjusting the time. So right now our sessions are 4 to 5 because we feel that is a great opportunity for most of our families to tune in. And then once every few weeks, we do an evening session to really drive home that population. And so that was really a pain point of figuring out what that time was, that the sessions and the events were going to be.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We had the same issue. And it's also like we found most of the events were best attended at night. So that was also like motivating the staff that your hours are shifting. Like we have to become available in the evening for our students and families. So how do you motivate them? It's the same thing we're kind of dealing with now as we look. We're still all remote. So as we look, depending on who you are, a few weeks or a few months into the future, how do we motivate people to come back for some of these events and in-person interactions? So I think the staff is so critical. Like, we have admission staff in every Zoom room when we do these big events, and they're so important to the technical side and just to be able to answer questions that maybe some of the academic units or university life offices don't have the answers to. But it looks like we have a question from Nathan about motivating or working with the current students. And I think, Chris, you mentioned you manage a lot of students. I don't know if you want to take this one.
Yeah, of course. So to be honest, it's a very difficult discussion, and a very, I think part of it is around, are your students paid or volunteer? So our students are volunteer for the most part. So all of the tour guides, those are all volunteer. We do have some office employees that are students, but most of our students are volunteer. Really, my personal experience was they were going through a lot, personally, emotionally, academically. And so really having to be flexible with them. So in person, we require attendance. We're very strict with our accountability. That's my number one rule with the program, is accountability. And so when we went virtual, I had to really tone that back and really say, all of this is going to be optional for you. Some of them have not been active at all. Some of them, there's about 10 to 20 that I know I can really count on. But I think a lot of it was I didn't want, and you mentioned at the end of your question there, like another Zoom meeting. That was something if they weren't invested in what we were doing and offering, then the experience isn't going to come through. It's already tough to display emotions and have that connection through computer screens. And so really trying to figure out how we can do that. And a lot of that was really just focus on those that were going to be invested moving forward. And when we get back to in-person, then kind of reopening back that discussion of allowing them to come in. I'm also finishing up my dissertation, and it revolved around transfer students transitioning during their first semester. And I did a lot of my research actually last fall, which was our complete virtual semester. And I saw the real social disconnect from campus with these students. And I knew that forcing them to participate and forcing them to do events they were going to shut off. And so really saying, we would love for you to join us. We would love for you to be involved. Now it helps having 130 students. Even if 50% said, absolutely no, I don't want to help, that still gives me a pool of 70 to work with. But it was really tough. So from my experience, it was really turning from having that rigid schedule, having that attendance policy, having that type of thing, be more in terms of, come to me if you want to help us, come to me if you have questions or you need support, because we were just seeing that the current students were really struggling. And a lot of times we forget that our student ambassadors are students. I know the student athletes, they're student first. These are students first. And so we had to focus and do that. And so that toned back a lot of our offerings. I think a lot of times we were like, oh, we can do 30 different events a week. We can really do this. But then it was really figuring out, but are we going to get the investment from our students? Maybe we need to start small and then bridge out as we see the involvement. But at least my personal experience was our current students were really struggling with being virtual and without having that connection to campus. And so it was really delicate in terms of really trying to get that. And luckily we were able to rely on about 20 ambassadors that we knew virtually they were going to sign up for just about anything.
Yeah, we saw the same pretty much. Like we have about 130 students signed up as volunteer ambassadors, and then about 25 who are active through this pandemic. So yeah, working with them, motivating the others, but it is hard. And I think we should all start focusing more on like, how are we going to rebuild these programs for when we are in person? Like some of these students are going to be graduating or losing interest or, just moving on to different opportunities. So how are we going to kind of restart our ambassador programs in the fall? I think should be a priority of admissions offices right now. What other questions do people have for us?
One thing I can, while we see if folks have some questions, another pain point we had was that because we tried to centralize and people started seeing how easy virtual events were to set up, to do on campus, there was a lot of involvement. There was a lot of, logistics to get an on-campus visit or event to go on. Virtually, it was really easy to do. So a lot of the colleges, a lot of departments, both my office, the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, there was a lot of ideas going around. There were a lot of sessions. There were a lot of events. And one thing we really figured out was we needed to all work together, and we needed to really streamline what was being offered so that we weren't offering something that one of the colleges were offering, but then also understanding that, especially from a communications and marketing perspective, you can't send an email out every day with, hey, here's a new event. Hey, here's a new event. Hey, here's a new event. So it was really trying to figure out how we can do it. And so at least from our perspective, what we did was I worked with our communications and marketing team to say, all right, the week before, so this week, before March, I'm going to give you all of our sessions for the month of March that we feel is unique, that prospective students and their families will want to tune into. And so then we sent out almost like a newsletter of here's the different offerings. We included the different colleges. If they were offering something outside of that daily visit, we really wanted to do that. And so that helped streamline the marketing communications because, a lot of you might have big prospect pools and you have a lot of different communication tracks and different communications that you're sending out. The last thing they want to do is every day get an email saying, hey, NC State's got a new event for you. Hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? So it was really trying to figure out how communications and marketing wise, we can streamline it to really not be a burden to the student and their family.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I would say that we shifted, like in the fall, it was really, we were used to about like an 82% show rate for our in-person events. And in the fall, we struggled to get to 60% virtually. But now with admitted students, we're back up to around 75. So it's like just shifting those priorities and understanding the numbers and like talking to the team about it, because it is discouraging when you plan an event and you think you have, 500 people coming and you get 250, it's just, it can be hard. And, we're limiting our registrations to just students right now, where before we were capturing their guests. So the numbers are a little off too. So just understanding the data. I'll add that something that now I'm starting to think about is my leadership's asked me to consider post-COVID or when we're back to supposed normal, what does it look like to run in-person and virtual events simultaneously? How will we, capture what we've learned virtually and continue that work? And I know for me, like, I have 3 people running virtual events right now, and that's probably not enough to do it to run in person and virtual. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to build our teams? Who are we going to train on how to run these events and try to transition some of these responsibilities? Because I do foresee, like, when this campus opens back up, there's going to be a rush of people who want to be here, who want to see campus before making their decisions. So, how are we going to use our resources? And we've been, we have to up our production quality. Like, I don't think it's enough anymore to have people sitting in their bedrooms or wherever on Zoom. Like, so we're trying to use our TV studio, like I mentioned, or, what cameras do we need? Who on campus can film, or who do we need to contract out with? Because, this office is crazy. So the longer this goes, the more higher expectations students have for us too.
Yeah, and I think that's something, in terms of looking forward, something that we decided to look at virtually was, all right, once we realized that this was not going to just be a couple weeks, couple months situation, was everything we're planning out, instead of at the beginning where we were just like, all right, we just need to push out content. We just need to push it out. We need to get it figured out for prospective students, was all right, now let's sit back and let's really start strategically thinking about what we're offering and what we're going to invest our time and effort into. In terms of our campus visits, we have 2 individuals, so myself and another individual that work with those. And so not a lot of, manpower in terms of figuring out how we can get everything going, especially where we're talking it once campus reopens. So what we started doing was anything we're going to offer virtually moving forward would be something we're going to continue when campus would reopen and in-person would happen. That then really allowed us to invest more time in not perfecting, but really just making sure that the communications, making sure the event platform, making sure the structure of everything we were doing, whether that was information sessions, topical sessions, chats, were to the best quality, because we knew that in 6 months, if campus reopened and we can go back to offering tours to 100 people, then these events would still be able to run because we've really figured out how to do it. And so that was really something we looked at, was really trying to figure out how to make sure that balance, because as you said, before this, we did not do anything virtually. Obviously, that cannot happen moving forward. So then we had to just really self-reflect on what are we going to want to do in the fall 2021, spring 2022, and moving forward, everything we're going to do is going to need to be to that quality.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to we figured it out, kind of. And so then how are we going to move forward with all of this? And that's what I was saying before at the beginning. I think it's important too for our teams to see us as leaders moving forward and adding new elements to the team and really challenging them, because it can get very monotonous working from home day in and day out and trying to do the same thing over and over again. So I've seen my team really flourish when we're presented with a challenge, or when we're asked to do something differently, or when I ask them hey, what about streaming this live, or how about inviting somebody else to do an opening? And it feels really nice to have that win when it goes really well. So I encourage everyone just to look for those little ways to change things up, because I think we all need wins right now. So it's a good success. It's a good rallying point for your teams. I think we have about 5 minutes left if anyone has any questions for us. You can throw them in the chat, or you can shout them out on Zoom.
The one thing I'll just kind of, in conclusion, kind of say is, I think the biggest challenge with going virtual was, I think a lot of institutions were very similar in that they didn't really do a lot virtually. And so there wasn't really a lot to go around the country to look at. Well, what are they doing? What are they doing? When it's on campus events, it's very easy. Everybody does it. So it was easy to say, all right, what's George Mason doing that we could pull from to plan ahead? Virtually, it was very much, who knows? So at the very end here, I'll put in the chat box my email. So if you have any questions or moving forward, if you have anything, then that would be great. We do have a question that just popped up here. What has been an ideal time for virtual events for prospective students and possibly parents too? I think Elena mentioned the later in the day, the better, is what we've seen. Definitely later in the day. That's why our sessions are 4 to 5, 7 to 8. All of our open house and yield events are in the evening. We've just found that to be better for those in different time zones, as well as, again, a lot of people are going back to office and not being able to. And a lot of times we found that schools were not able to just let kids out anymore. They weren't able to at 2 p.m. or 1 p.m. or noon leave school to virtually attend an event. They were very strict with that. So the later in the evening we found to be better.
And we have another question about the priorities, I would say, for your team. What I found is to have somebody who really knows the technology and somebody who can really plan, communicate with campus stakeholders. And if those two people can work together and then present to the counselors or whoever else is going to be participating, then you can have a successful event. But 2 people minimum, I would say, for a lot of this.
Yeah, and in terms of what are the critical topics you recommend to cover for prospective students, I would say, definitely the process, but I think virtually a lot more has to be about the campus and student experience, because they're not able to see that. They're not able to engage with campus. So whether it's videos, pictures, different things you can get around campus. A lot of institutions are doing kind of live virtual tours where students on Instagram Live and social media are doing kind of a virtual tour. We've seen that to be really helpful with folks that can't come to campus to do that. So, I think that is what I would say topic wise is that campus and student experience, because virtually they're just not really able to get that connection.
Yeah, I would agree. And my dream, we only have a 500 person limit on our Zoom webinar license. So that's why we've had to utilize a lot of live streaming technology because a lot of our events, our bigger events are way more than 500 students. So my dream is to be able to have some sort of chat like Zoom has while we're live streaming, like a message board or something. So if anybody's figured that out, I would love to hear, because I do think when we're able to use the Zoom webinar or a Zoom session, the conversation is really rich and the students are able to connect with one another. And, that's awesome. And that's what they would do at a normal in-person event. So, we've struggled with do we register more than 500 and just go for the no questions type event, or do we limit our registration so we can have that conversation? So, we've done both, and I personally prefer the being able to have the chat.
Yeah, so it looks like we're in the last couple seconds here of our session. And so again, thank you for attending. We both put our emails in the chat there. Feel free to reach out. Again, I think, as we mentioned, this virtual, even though we've been in it for about a year, it's still evolving. And so utilizing professional organizations like SACRAO and other organizations really have helped at least our institution in terms of moving forward in the virtual world. So we appreciate your attendance.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from some of you for an exchange of ideas too. Have a good rest of your day.
Just FYI for the rest of the group, one, I want to say thank you to Elena and Chris. Thank you for sharing your wisdom this morning, and I'm sure everybody took away something. The next session starts in about 15 minutes. Keep in mind the attendance is very large today, so it might be in your best interest to jump in a few minutes early, just to go ahead and claim that spot in the session. So, thanks again. Look forward to seeing you guys throughout the rest of the day.